Hi, this is Tim Weber, and I'm going to try to finish up the chapter 9 for you. And with us here today is Thomas the Wonder Dog. So hope you enjoy it. Bye bye. Okay, this is continuing the chapter on adolescence and the physical development. Nutrition is an important contribution to health during the adolescent years. However, many adolescents suffer from some level of dietary deficiency. Fewer than half of teenagers get the recommended daily amount of iron, and this can lead to anemia, a lack of iron. More girls suffer from anemia than boys, and this may be due to the fact that some iron is lost due to menstruation, and also girls are more likely to restrict their diet and therefore not get enough iron. That said, boys that engage in intense labor and very intense sports training also may develop anemia if not taking in enough iron. In many cases, girls who are anemic are unaware of it, and they may just believe that they're not getting enough sleep, that they're too busy, and therefore feel fatigued. However, later they may find out that that fatigue is actually anemia. Sometimes one of the first awareness of that happens to be if they try to donate blood and find out that they don't have enough iron in their blood to donate. Now, when it comes to sources of iron in the diet, the best sources of iron are meats of various kinds, especially red meats, beef and venison, those red meats, and most of all the organ meats, liver, the heart, and those sort of things. One of the concerns we have today is many people are recommending that people avoid red meats, and teenagers in particular may therefore not get enough iron. Now, one can also get some iron through vegetables like beans and that sort of thing, but the efficiency of that is far lower than that of meats. Another concern about nutrition at this point is that half of one's adult bone mass is laid down between age 10 and 20. However, few adolescents are consuming enough calcium to deposit the amount of calcium in those bones to then prevent osteoporosis later. One of the reasons for that is often adolescents have heard to avoid dairy products for a variety of reasons. However, dairy products are one of the easiest ways and most effective ways to get calcium in one's diet. That said, green leafy vegetables do offer some, but again, those aren't really very popular with adolescents in many cases. We also know that only about 1 out of 5 high school students eat 5 or more fruits or vegetables a day, as is recommended. And so for this reason, a number of other nutrients also may be deficient in their diet. Now, we often blame the adolescent for being careless about what they eat, but the fact is that in many cases, the adolescent will choose the healthier food when it's prepared in an appetizing sort of way and when it's made readily available. Many adolescents get a good bit of their diet from fast food, and they found that when fast food establishments provided healthier food choices at the same or lower prices than the less healthy foods, adolescents would choose a healthier food, but it relied on the food being cheaper and more readily available. So adolescents may indeed do a good job of making food choices when we set the right conditions. Body image also may have an effect on the adolescent's nutrition. That's how a person thinks their body looks. Does one have a positive view of that or negative? And often the adolescent's perception of themselves is faulty. Girls may believe that they look overweight when they're in fact normal weight, and therefore diet to become thinner, and for that reason then also may be more prone to dietary deficiencies. Boys may want to look taller and stronger, and for that reason they may fall into using performance enhancing drugs, steroids and such, to try to get that look. But once again, that is going to have some negative health consequences long term. Now, body image is something that the media has influenced as well. Often they'll idealize the European looking features, even with people of other ethnic groups. They tend to portray those that have the more European looking features. But let's face it, hey, even most Anglos don't look like the models that they show in the media. And for this reason, though, a lot of teenagers fail to appreciate the features of their ethnicity and the fact that each ethnic group has a variety of beautiful and handsome characteristics. And they also may not realize that their facial features are still developing, and so an adolescent's nose is somewhat larger in proportion to the rest of their face as to what it will be eventually once they finish maturing, yet they may not recognize that and insist that they have to have the size of their nose reduced. So once again, there are a number of things that lead to a faulty body image and the consequences thereof. Obviously, we need to portray people in the media that are more normal rather than the rather unusual specimens that we tend to see there, so that kids can get an idea of what's really typical. Now, because adolescents then may be concerned about how they look and feel they don't measure up, they may either eat erratically or ingest drugs to alter their weight, their diet, or use, say, diet pills to try to prevent gaining weight or lose weight. That said, some of them just give up and they begin, sitting down on the sofa and just basically sitting there. And as they do, often they're going to be consuming a large number of calories as they do sit around. 12% of teenagers here in the U.S. are overweight, and when interviewed, 2 out of 3 American high school girls said that they were trying to lose weight. Even 1/3 of boys said so. This is also the age when eating disorders are most likely to appear, if they develop at all, and some of these dietary habits may contribute to development of eating disorders. The first eating disorder we want to review would be anorexia nervosa, and here the person ends up with a dangerously low body weight. They compulsively restrict their food intake, and there's an intense fear of weight gain. The person, in fact, may have a disturbance of bodily perception. As they look at themselves in the mirror, they may see somebody that they believe looks fat when in fact they are actually too thin. And because there is an error in perception, then they may deny that they have a problem. They're really not fully aware of what's going on in some cases. Bulimia nervosa is a different pattern of eating disorder, and this involves binge eating, often with a sense of lack of control during the binge eating episode, and then this is followed by some compensatory behavior, some sort of purging, and the purging most commonly takes the form of vomiting. However, in some cases the bulimic might use laxatives or They might use excessive exercise in an effort to rid themselves of the excess calories from the binge eating. Clinically, the diagnostic criteria says that this must occur on average at least once a week for 3 months or more. Again, with bulimia, often there is a distorted body image as well. In bulimia, however, the person might not obviously have a problem. They might be overweight, they might be normal body weight, or they might also develop anorexia in addition to this. In looking at causes of eating disorders, in many cases we can't pinpoint one factor, but there may be a combination of a number of factors. Genetic factors. We do know that eating disorders are more likely to occur in families where there have been others with eating disorders. Also tends to be more common in families where there's a history of depression. Dieting then may trigger that syndrome in those who are vulnerable to it. Cultural ideals of thinness also may contribute. As the media portrays that you have to be thin to be successful, people may feel pressured to become thin. This may trigger it in those who are vulnerable. Social pressure as well, trying to conform to what friends and others suggest is necessary. Parents who pressure the child to be unusually thin, and then pressure to succeed in activities where thinness might be helpful. For example, maybe competing in gymnastics or activities where one needs to be thin. Now that doesn't always trigger this, but where the person is vulnerable, that might be the thing that pushes them over the edge. Also, a need for control may contribute to this, and the adolescent who feels they have little control over anything in their life may turn to this to try to have a sense of control. This may be particularly the case in adolescents that have extremely controlling parents. This might be one way that they sort of show the parent that they aren't 100% in control of their lives. And there may be a misinterpretation of hunger and satiety cues. The person may believe they're hungry when they're actually thirsty, or they may not recognize when they've eaten enough and have that sense of satiety. And it's also suggested maybe neurotransmitter abnormalities, potentially serotonin, might also come into play, although that may be a little bit questionable. We know that if we can establish sound dietary habits with children in their childhood years, this may have somewhat a protective effect. Maybe not 100%, but makes it somewhat less likely that the person falls prey to one of these eating disorders. Now moving to the development of thinking in adolescence. The brain development progresses rapidly in adolescence. Reward centers of the brain become more active. On the other hand, areas that inhibit acting on one's impulses become less active. The prefrontal cortex that's responsible for our logical thinking has not yet fully matured and doesn't until one gets into one's mid-20s. So when under the influence of strong emotions, the logic centers of the adolescent brain may simply shut down. And we ask that adolescent, what were you thinking when you did that thing? And they'll just have to say, well, I just really wasn't thinking. They were acting on emotion. Some have compared the teenage brain to a supercharged engine being driven by an unskilled driver. The teen brain is very powerful, and yet the adolescent does not have in many cases, the experience to manage it effectively in every case. And we'll also see with the adolescent a need for excitement, a need for speed, an attraction to emotional reactions, to events that are exciting. Now, there are some benefits for the adolescent brain working in this fashion. In fact, that emotional intensity that they have enables them to become very passionate about things that are important to them, and they can become very much focused on new accomplishments as a result of that passion. Learning that's acquired during adolescence also is very durable. Those neural pathways formed at this time tend to persist even into adulthood. So this is one of the best times for a person to do their most important learning for life. So in fact, in some cases we can say the adolescent brain provides them with an advantage in learning. It stimulates them to become interested and excited about new things and to learn more, and to learn in such a way that it will stick with them. Adolescent egocentrism is a function of the way their brain works at this point. We might say that egocentrism has taken a little bit of a vacation during middle childhood, and it now seems to often reappear full force. Adolescents at times may focus on themselves to the exclusion of others. They may have the sense that their thoughts, feelings, and experiences are unique, and therefore no one could possibly understand what they were going through, or no one has ever come up with such a wonderful idea or an experience that they have. It's so awful. No one has been through anything that terrible. And sometimes it's a surprise to them when they find out that, oh, you're not the only one. Because of their egocentrism, though, they may take things personally. We might make a comment to someone else not related to them, and they may have the feeling that we're now talking to them and criticizing them. They also become more self-conscious about their appearance at this point, especially between age 10 through 14 or so. The self-consciousness increases dramatically. Now, some of this kind of thinking we can call the personal fable, and the adolescent may have an unrealistic expectation of becoming unique, some sort of hero, famous, a legend, when in fact it's not a realistic idea for them. Also, they may exhibit what we call the invincibility fable. That's a feeling that they can't be overcome or harmed by anything, even if it might defeat a normal mortal. They have a sense that they're invulnerable, a feeling of being sort of bulletproof. And because they have that sense of invincibility, then they may engage in risky behaviors, even behaviors that they know have harmed others significantly, believing that they'll be okay. So as you see in the picture, they might take risks in cliff diving, they might drive recklessly, or be reckless in the use of drugs. In terms of military service, they found that younger soldiers tend to take more risks, in fact sometimes unnecessary risks, in the hope of maybe being a hero. So often that means that more mature individuals need to sort of pull them back from time to time. Another characteristic of adolescent thinking is the imaginary audience. And this is the egocentric belief that everybody is watching, that everybody's taking note of their appearance, their ideas, their behavior, they have the sense that they're in the spotlight under a microscope with everybody watching. And so in some cases this means they become extremely self-conscious about their clothing, their hairstyles. If there's any imperfection like a blemish on their face, they may be very hesitant to go in public. If their clothing isn't just right, they may refuse to go with their friends. To them it's very important, and they assume adults would feel the same way. If adults question that whole idea that they have to be look perfect, they may get the idea that the adult just doesn't care. In fact, they don't recognize that often they're exaggerating how noticeable their faults are or their appearance. In some cases, this also takes the form of calling attention to oneself, doing things to be noticed by others as well, particularly where the person craves that attention of that imaginary audience and then finds that, oh, people are not paying attention. They may do things to get others' attention. Now, Piaget says that in adolescence the person enters the stage of formal operational thought. And this is the fourth and final stages of Piaget's cognitive development theory. At this point, the logic becomes more refined, and the adolescent now develops the ability to think about abstract ideas. They're now capable of hypothetical thinking. They are able to think about potential scenarios and reason about them, something they couldn't do in middle childhood when they were in that concrete operational thought period. Now, hypothetical thinking, then, the capacity to think of possibilities, not just reality. The adolescent can reason about propositions and possibilities that don't reflect reality. For example, when given this problem to solve, they can answer correctly. If dogs are bigger than elephants and if mice are bigger than dogs, are elephants smaller than mice? And the logical conclusion, if we start with these propositions, is that elephants indeed are smaller than mice if the first part is true. Now, the adolescent can reason through that. A younger child, they just do not reason with that, and instead will always give the answer, well, elephants are always bigger. Okay, they can't think hypothetically contrary to reality. Now, that said, the ability to think about all these possibilities may confuse the adolescent. And in fact, some then conclude that everything is relative, that any conclusion is just as good as another, and so whatever you think, no matter what your opinion and how close to reality it is or not, is just as good as anyone else's. Now, that type of relativist thinking also may mean they hesitate to share their convictions. If they're convinced about something, they may still not say so, simply thinking that, well, maybe everybody knows just as much as I do. They also, as a result, may hesitate to judge intended behaviors as being right or wrong, again, judging things from a relativistic viewpoint. Now, their ability to think hypothetically also means that when evaluating the plans and ideas of others, they're able to sometimes see flaws in that plan and offer criticism. Sometimes that's great, although sometimes parents will also say, boy, I just can't say anything before they start to come up with reasons why it won't work, why something else might be better. And a lot of times they will criticize their parents' ideas based on how they're reasoning things. Now, when it comes to reasoning, we can identify two different approaches to reasoning. One is deductive reasoning, and we begin with a general statement, premises or principles that have been identified through much research, much testing, and then through logical steps we figure out and deduce the specifics of a situation. For example, the adolescent can learn the qualities of triangles, that they have three sides, three angles. The angles add up to 180 degrees, and then we can show them any shape, and they can determine on the basis of these principles whether it's a triangle or not. Now, on the other hand, the younger child, not being able to reason deductively as well, may be fooled by certain shapes, or uncertain whether unusual types of triangles are actually triangles. Inductive reasoning is where we reason from our own personal experience, the limited facts of our experience, and come to general conclusions. For example, maybe we have met some people from Whoville, and they all have those funny noses if you ever watched the movie The Grinch. And so then every time we meet a person that has that sort of shape of nose, we assume that they must be from Whoville. We're reasoning from a limited database here, and in fact we may make some errors, because in fact there may be people from other places that have similar facial features. So in many ways, inductive reasoning is somewhat less cognitively advanced than deductive thinking. Inductive reasoning, however, is one of the primary ways younger children reason. Now, just because adolescents can use hypothetical deductive reasoning doesn't mean that they always use it. Sometimes it's just easier and quicker to forget about all the logic and just follow one's impulses, just go with whatever one's emotions might suggest would be the best course of action. So even though they can engage in this more advanced type of thinking, they don't always do it. We can also then consider adolescent thinking from the standpoint of the dual process model. This idea is that there's two networks of information processing which exist within the human brain, and we have an intuitive network and an analytic network. And these two types of thinking are distinctly different. We can also refer to these two systems as one being creative and the other being factual, one as unconscious and the other as conscious. Or we can say one system processes information emotionally, and in the other system the processing is intellectual. Or we can say one system is experiential, primarily based on experience, the other is rational, primarily based on reasoning. Now, to contrast these two then, notice that analytical thinking is thinking logically. It's using your head. It takes effort to think analytically. It's intentional, and that said, slower. On the other hand, intuitive thinking is sort of an emotional way of thinking, kind of going with what your heart says. It's effortless, automatic, and very rapid. One doesn't have to spend any time getting the answer. Now, many people will emphasize that adolescents need to develop their analytical thinking, and I agree with that. However, we should also recognize that both of these types of thinking has an important function for an individual. For example, when making a decision about what career to go into, should one rely on analytical thinking or intuitive thinking? Well, some people will say one ought to rely on analytical thinking, one ought to use logic and stick with the facts. So find out what's involved with that profession. How much do you make? What do you have to do? Write it all down on a piece of paper with a plus on one side and a minus on the other. And then you can total up the pluses and minuses and decide very logically which thing you should go into. Now, that is an important thing to do when considering one's profession. However, I would argue that intuitive thinking is just as important. And in addition to looking at the facts and reasoning logically, one should also listen to one's emotional response. And so as the person looks at that particular type of work, what is the emotional response they have to that? Yes, it looks good on paper, reasoning through it, but how do you really feel about doing that kind of work? If we don't take the intuitive thinking into account, we may find ourselves down the road years later saying, oh yeah, I made all the money, or I had good working conditions as I had found with the facts, but I don't really like doing this work. And the emotional end of it may let us down. And at that point, the person may experience a crisis and finally conclude they're just not going to do this anymore. So I would say engaging both the analytical and intuitive brain, pretty important when it comes to decision making. Now, intuitive thoughts then would be emotions, hunches that we have, things that we can't rationally explain. How did we come to this conclusion? I don't know exactly, but that's just what came up. Actually, our past experience, our cultural assumptions, and sudden impulses are kind of precursors of these sorts of thoughts. Analytical thinking results from weighing the facts and then analyzing the consequences, weighing the pros and cons, the risks and benefits, the possibilities and facts. Analytical thought then depends on logic and rationality. Again, in my view, both of these are important in our decision making. Now, shifting then to the topic of teaching and learning for adolescents. Secondary education is the level usually thought to begin in grade 6 or 7 through grade 12 or so. If you go to some other countries, the system might be a bit different, roughly 6th through 12th grade. And what they have found is that completion of secondary education correlates with a lot of desirable things, better health long-term, also accumulating, experiencing more wealth as well. 85% of adolescents worldwide receive some secondary education. As you can see, 70% in Eastern Asia. However, only 40% of adolescents in sub-Saharan Africa get to participate in secondary education. So figures vary around the world. In most places now, there is what's called middle school, and what they have found is at this point the academic achievement often slows, and in many cases they call the first year of middle school the low ebb of learning. Often the adolescent doesn't learn very much in that first year of middle school, and in fact may hit their lowest grades of their entire academic career. One of the reasons for that is behavioral problems become much more common as children enter middle school, And we have the biological stresses of puberty, the hormones changing, bodies changing rapidly, new desires because of that physical development. And we also have in middle school increased competition. The adolescent who in elementary didn't have many people to compete with now has to compete with a much larger group of people to be successful. And we also have increased social needs. In middle school, everybody is trying to fit in, find their place. Nobody wants to be unpopular. And so in trying to do this, often they're going to find social interaction to be much more interesting than the material being taught in class. And there also is a conflict in structuring the school day. The school day is not entirely consistent with the metabolism of early adolescents who are not necessarily real sharp early in the day. And as the day goes on also, they find that there is little time for them to take care of social needs, as well as a great deal of exposure to a wide variety of people, making it difficult to pick up those social relationships that they're hungry for. In middle school, teachers often have many students. Previously, in elementary school, kids have been used to usually being in a small class with the same students all day. Now they're often with a different group of students in every class all day long. And teachers having so many students don't get to know them as well, just at the point where connection between students and teachers is really key for learning. And part of the thing seems to be scheduling. There just doesn't seem to be enough time for the teacher to get to know all of those students, or to be available to each of those students that has a concern or needs some special attention. Students' relationships often with one another deteriorate as they get into middle school. There's more competition to be popular, and there's just a wider number of people that the child is interacting with. In middle school, to that middle school student, friendships, peers, very important to them. That said, often it's the aggressive, risk-taking students that are admired by others, and so that means those will be the people often that the other kids try to emulate, imitate. And because popularity focuses on the students who are, quote, cool, that means often the nerds and geeks are going to be left out. If you're too studious, if you are too interested in what's being taught at school, then you may become sort of an outcast. So often middle school students will risk failing at school rather than being excluded from groups of friends. Academic motivation suffers and grades drop. Competition also may shadow fragile egos. Just when the child is becoming very self-conscious, they have to compete with many others and find that now it's not so easy to be the best at everything. So in some cases they simply give up because they're not used to having such stiff competition. Now, how does the middle schooler then cope with or explain why they're not doing well in school? Do they usually take responsibility and say, yes, I'm not really applying myself? And usually not. Usually the approach is to blame others, or simply not trying, to say, well, I just didn't try. And that's sort of the way they may try and cope with it. That said, when one blames others or stops trying to do well, that usually does not lead to improvement in schoolwork. So suggestions are that middle school teachers need to consider the unique needs of children of this age group and learning styles of individual students, and they need to tap into techniques that stimulate emotions and social motives, because these are the things that keep the adolescent, the middle schooler, engaged in their education. They want some excitement, and they want some chances to interact with their peers. So using techniques like role-playing, having debates, and group interaction can be used effectively with middle school students. Now, we've also found that beliefs about intelligence and how learning works affect the success of children in middle school. Now, one approach to intelligence is called the entity approach. And the entity approach is the idea that intelligence is genetic, that you're just born with so much of it and there's nothing you can do to change that. The entity approach would suggest that effort doesn't really make any difference. That doesn't matter. It's just you're either born having the opportunity to learn or you're not. The results when middle schoolers are convinced of this approach is that they give up if they don't succeed immediately. They don't put effort into succeeding, thinking that it won't do any good. Obviously, that approach to intelligence is something that we need to discourage. On the other hand, the incremental approach to intelligence is the idea that ability increases with work and effort. That ability is just like exercising a muscle, and the more effort, the more work you put in, then the greater your capacity. And a couple programs used in middle schools have tried to teach that approach. One was called Mastery Motivation, and another was called Grow Your Intelligence. And what they found is when they convince middle school students that ability increases with work and effort, we see higher educational achievement. We also have noticed that schools that emphasize competition tend to foster that entity approach, the idea that everybody has a limited ability. In less gifted students, this means often schools that are highly competitive, the less gifted students simply give up, thinking that there's nothing that can be done. One of the challenges that many students experience in adolescence is entering a new school. Changing schools often occurs just as a growth spurt of adolescence is occurring, or development of sexual characteristics. So the adolescent already is dealing with physical changes, potentially changes in emotional responses, and in some cases the accumulated stress of a new school and all of these other changes may trigger psychopathology, that is a psychological disorder. The first year of middle school, also first year of high school, correlates with higher rates of bullying, lower achievement on the parts of students, and a greater likelihood of each student experiencing depression or eating disorders. If one enters high school as a minority, that also increases the level of stress. They find that if support systems for adolescents are strengthened in these first years of a new school, this can make for a smoother transition. So support from family, support from friends, support from teachers, school counselors, all of these things benefit the adolescent, particularly as they enter a new school. Bullying increases in middle school, and one of the modern types of bullying that has become much more prevalent is cyberbullying, where adolescents use technology to spread insults or rumors. What they found is where there is a positive school climate, when adolescents thought highly about their school and enjoyed it, there was much less cyberbullying, and also students disapproved more likely when others engaged in that cyberbullying. On the other hand, where there was a negative school climate, where school climate was oppressive, or students simply just didn't like the school, then often students with inflated self-esteem more likely become bullies in that negative sort of school climate. High school, one of the emphasis in recent years has been on preparing students to go to college, to convince more students to prepare for college. So a great deal of effort goes into the college-bound students. There are more students taking AP classes and early college classes, dual enrollment classes, than ever before. High schools also are stiffening graduation requirements, and testing is being used to try to verify that people are graduating with the needed skills. But the research is still not really showing that adolescents are better in their thinking than previously. What may be needed is instruction in formal thinking, how to reason effectively, how to develop one's critical thinking skills. That may be the gap that needs to be looked at. High stakes tests, those are those tests that one must pass. If they don't pass, there are some very serious consequences. These now often are required that students pass these to be promoted to next grade level or to graduate. And in many cases, the idea behind them that these will ensure that everybody gets what they need from the educational system. That said, many people would suggest that the effects of these are to narrow the education the students get to focusing in just on things that they would be tested on. Also, many suggest that this has increased the disinterest in school, boredom amongst students, and that in fact many of these tests may be somewhat discriminatory. They have found that in areas of lower income, where schools often are not as financially well off, that students are much more likely to fail these high stakes tests, and the result then is an increased dropout rate. So all in all, the track record of high stakes tests in improving education, not very good. In fact, many Asian countries moving the direction of reducing or eliminating high stakes tests. And so maybe this is not the best approach to improving the education of high school students. As I mentioned, there's been a lot of focus on then preparing, if possible, all students for college, the idea of college for everyone. And that's also one of the reasons that a more advanced high school curriculum has been put in place. But again, some of the effects of this, well, it is true there are more college-ready graduates that have all of the college prerequisites. That's true. However, the other side of it is also produced more people dropping out of high school. Now, the reality is many high school graduates, even though they've achieved a high school diploma, don't go on for more education. And so, how well has their high school education prepared them for their lives? It's been suggested that what we need to do is increase the number of apprenticeship programs and career activities for high school students who are not interested in going to college, so that they also can graduate with marketable skills and make a decent living. Apprenticeship programs, these are programs where one learns the skills of a trade little by little already while in high school, while doing some other academic work. Career academies, where one, in going into a particular profession, then goes through a specific high school program that prepares them for that career. These types of programs have worked very well in Europe. Often they identify what type of work the person, what kind of trade the person wants to get into or career early on, so that in high school they can then become part of one of these programs. It's suggested that this is something that we should look very seriously at here in the U.S. Also something that to some extent we had years ago that actually was discontinued in many places in order to focus on sending everyone to college. So something to think about there. Now then the question is there a change of focus needed in high schools? And we do know that school resources now focus on the higher achieving students and those who are college bound. Academic classes are emphasized in high schools, yet employers, when asked what they want from high school graduates, said, well, they wanted people that had better reading skills, better writing skills, also thinking skills and relationship skills. These are things that, to a great extent, the high school curriculum doesn't really concentrate on that much. Also, one of the other things in terms of a change of focus is that vocational guidance is often inadequate. Many high school students get no vocational guidance, so they have no idea where they want to go in terms of a vocation when they do graduate from high school. Even if they go on to college, they don't have a good idea of what sort of major they might be interested in. Where there are vocational tests given, often there's inadequate follow-up. These sort of things need some interpretation and personal consultation with each student to interpret the results of them, to discuss some of the adolescents' feelings about various things that might be highlighted as a result of those vocational tests. So again, it seems that our educational system should be doing better in providing vocational guidance for high school students. Now, you might say, well, why is it so important to improve education, especially at that level? And one of the reasons is simply if we could improve our results, this could be very beneficial for the United States economically. One particular test involves tests of scientific ability. They found if we could raise the American PISA scores by 25%, we would also end up boosting our American gross domestic product by $40 trillion a year. This would give a significant boost to the American economy. Now, it turns out that in order to raise those scores, what would need to be done is we would need to teach thinking skills that boost those scores, including teaching students to think creatively, to be flexible in their thinking, and then to develop their analytical reasoning abilities. These skills then increase innovation, coming up with new technology. So investing in education to advance these skills is really an investment in human capital, if you will. We all would benefit. And there you have it. There is the remainder of Chapter 9. I hope the video played well for you, and review it as you see fit. Thanks. Bye-bye.